Long ago, in a prosperous kingdom in Ethiopia, there lived a wise and just king. He was known for his intelligence, but he wanted to test whether wisdom was something only the rich and powerful could possess. So, he issued a challenge to his people. Whoever can answer my 3 difficult questions will be rewarded with gold and a place in my court. Many wise men, scholars, and advisors from across the land came to try their luck. But one by one, they failed. Just as the king was beginning to believe that no one could answer his riddles, a poor farmer approached the palace with his young daughter, Aster. Aster was no ordinary girl. She was known in her village for her sharp mind and quick wit. When she heard of the king's challenge, she begged her father to take her to the palace. The king was surprised to see a mere girl step forward. Amused, he decided to let her try. The first test, the thread that passes through a pearl. The king handed Aster a small, smooth pearl and said, "If you are truly wise, thread a string through this pearl without making a hole in it." The wise men had failed this task, for the pearl was solid. But Aster smiled and took a handful of honey and placed it at one end of the pearl. Then, she took a tiny ant and placed it at the other end. The ant, smelling the honey, crawled through the pearl's natural groove and emerged on the other side, pulling the string with it. The king was impressed but not yet convinced. The second test, the strongest rope in the world. Next, the king presented her with a bundle of fine silk threads and said, "Make a rope from these that is strong enough to pull a heavy cart." Aster thought for a moment and then said, "Great king, in order to make the strongest rope, I must first see how your strongest men make theirs." The king nodded, and his strongest men demonstrated how they twisted many small strands together to make thick ropes. Aster then took the delicate silk threads and braided them together. She continued twisting and weaving until the silk formed a thick, unbreakable cord. She tied one end to a cart, and to everyone's amazement, the cord held strong. The king smiled. "You are clever indeed, but there is one final test." The third test, a cup of truth. The king filled a cup with water and held it up. "Tell me, wise girl, how many stars are reflected in this cup?" Aster gazed at the water and then at the king. She took the cup, gently shook it, and then poured the water onto the ground. The reflections disappeared. She looked up at the king and said, "O wise king, the stars in the sky cannot be counted, nor can the reflections in this cup. The moment we try to capture them, they change. Truth is like this water, it cannot always be held in a cup or seen in a single way." The king laughed and clapped his hands in admiration. "You have outwitted even my best scholars. True wisdom is not found in riches or age but in understanding and creativity." True to his word, he rewarded Aster with gold and invited her to join his royal court as his advisor. But Aster, being humble, chose to return to her village to teach others that wisdom is not about knowing all the answers but about thinking in new ways. And from that day on, the people of Ethiopia remembered the tale of the wise girl who outsmarted a king. Aster had returned to her village after proving her wisdom to the king, but her story spread far and wide. People from neighboring kingdoms spoke of the young girl who had outwitted the wisest men. One day, an envoy from a distant kingdom arrived at the Ethiopian palace with a message for the king. Their ruler, Emperor Menelik, had heard of Aster's wisdom and wanted to test her himself. If she could pass his final challenge, he would offer her great wealth and a place among the highest scholars of his court. The Ethiopian king, proud of Aster, sent for her. "One more test, Aster," he said. "Are you willing to face it?" Aster, with a knowing smile, replied, "If wisdom is tested again and again, let it be so." She set off on the journey with the royal delegation, arriving at the emperor's grand palace, where a massive crowd had gathered to witness the test. Emperor Menelik sat on his golden throne, studying the young girl who stood before him with confidence. The final test, the impossible gift. The emperor spoke, his voice deep and commanding. Aster, I have heard of your wit, but I have a challenge no one has ever solved. Bring me a gift that is both alive and dead, both from the land and the sky, and both large and small at the same time. If you fail, you must remain in my service forever. A murmur spread through the crowd. How could one object be all these things at once? The wisest men of the land had failed this very test. Aster bowed respectfully and asked for 3 days to find the gift. The emperor granted her request. For 2 days, she wandered through the kingdom, deep in thought. Then, on the 3rd day, as the sun set, she returned to the emperor's court carrying a small cage covered with a silk cloth. The crowd watched in silence as she unveiled her gift. Inside the cage was a small bird with an insect in its beak. She stepped forward and spoke. Great Emperor, this bird is both alive and dead, for as you see, it lives, but in its mouth is an insect it has killed. It is both from the land and the sky, because though it flies, it nests on the earth. And it is both large and small, for to an ant, it is large, but to an elephant, it is small. The emperor's eyes widened in astonishment, and then, a deep laugh echoed through the court. He stood and clapped his hands. You, Aster, have done what no one else could. You have answered the impossible riddle. He then turned to his advisors and declared, true wisdom is not about memorizing knowledge, but about seeing the world differently. Aster was offered a place of honor in the emperor's court, but she declined once again. Wisdom belongs to all people, not just rulers, she said. I must return to my village to share what I have learned. The emperor, impressed by her humility, granted her riches and sent her home with great honor. From that day forward, Aster was not just known as the wise girl, but as the girl who answered the impossible.